Hi, so my name is Vinessa and I'm a principal program manager at the New York Times.
And I'm Brett Haranin. I'm a senior software engineer, also at the New York Times.
Great, and as was suggested, we're here to talk about how do you manage SRE, particularly when teams are not required to work with you? Essentially, how do you drive change by influence and not by authority? We're going to talk about a little bit who we are and how we got here, and then we're going to dive into this practice through a case study from our recent midterms elections readiness effort in 2018. So about the New York Times, we have about 1,600 journalists on staff that report in over 160 countries. 1,600 journalists this is our largest ever on record. We have 15 bureaus in the US and 31 international bureaus. Each day, we publish around 250 pieces of original journalism. And in 2018, that was about 55,000 pieces altogether. Many are familiar with us as a newspaper, but in fact, we have a growing digital presence. Out of our 4.7 million total paid subscribers, we have 3.8 million subscribers that are digital only. To give you some perspective, I believe it's the London News UK who manages the London Times and Sunday Times. In July 2018, they reported 500,000 total paid subscriptions, 255,000 digital only. To support these digital experience, we have over 500 people in technology. And these teams include our content management systems that publish our news onto the site, as well as the other pieces of content like our multimedia, as well as personalization and comments, and our web and mobile platforms. We also have other teams that support other aspects of the business, like our customer care platforms, making sure we have solid data analytics, making sure we have information security and compliance, and even our cooking. Highly recommend the cooking comments, by the way. So how did we get here? I don't know if many folks here have a company where they've had a site like this. But this website from the 90s wasn't really our first foray into the digital space. In 1974, our newsroom started using computers for reporting. And in 1994, some folks here, I don't know if anyone remembers AOL. Great. We were there as well. And in 1996, we were one of the first news sites to ever be on the internet. Our technology continued to grow, and we expanded our offerings as we listed out on the previous slides. And to support all those experiences and features, we grew a very large central infrastructure team that managed physical data centers in the continental US, as well as had a systems team that was the on-page for all these teams. I think many of those who are familiar with how DevOps came to be is very familiar with probably how that worked. Infrastructure team was viewed very much as a slow process, and there was a lot of tight restrictions, and there was also this impression that dev would just kick things over to the wall for ops. In 2015, and that's why in 2010, when we started using AWS and cloud technology, it was actually used very similarly to how we use the data center. Still very tightly controlled, still viewed as an impediment for teams. In 2015, we started exploring CI/CD practices. And our major departments in technology, we actually decided as a company to really limit different types of features on the roadmap and devoted a whole summer for teams to start building out separate CI/CD pipelines. We learned a lot. However, as a consequence of each of these teams building out their own pipelines, it quickly became fragmented, and we had about over 5 pipelines. In 2016, we made the decision to shut down the data centers. And that kind of was where we started forming the delivery engineering team. What is delivery engineering? It's a picture of curling. This is actually from a blog post, Greg Dominowitz's blog. a delivery engineering team. I didn't know much about curling. Does anyone know about curling or what it is? Okay, some people, okay, so I did not know. And I didn't realize that when you have the curler in the center, when they push that rock down the ice, it has this tendency to swerve off path. And that's where the role of those teammates come in. They sweep the ice to make sure there is a clear path to where the rock needs to go. And that's why it's also sometimes called chess and ice. It's all about them partnering and working together. And that's where we saw ourselves and we were inspired. Greg writes, delivery engineering teams enables others to deliver business value faster. Not pushing out code, just delivering value faster, which means this code is delivered in a reliable way. Delivery engineering as a team, we provide tooling and automation for product engineering teams to use. And we also, with that tooling and automation, produce a lot of process and guidances so that they know how to work. Also, and a lot of times we'll do what we call engagements with teams. And this could be a very lightweight, or it could be us just embedding with the team. And these types of engagements tend to occur particularly if maybe someone is really struggling with an effort and they might need our guidance. Or maybe there is a use case that they're not able to find in our tooling. So we'll actually have a shared goal on both our roadmaps and spin up a project team to work out and figure out how we can come up with a problem that could be rolled out to other teams. It's very important that we were not infrastructure. We are not infrastructure, we're not networking, we were not systems. And it's not to say that these were bad. But what was really important for us is how we saw ourselves and how we saw our teams. When we were formed in March 2016, in our mission, we spelled out the focus is going to be, and how we judge our success will be on how various engineering teams perceive us. It was a very radical way of thinking, where teams were used to an infrastructure team just telling them what to do, and for us to take a customer-centric approach. So we adopted what we call a product management mindset. So what does this mean? What this does is you view the teams that work with you as customers. And what happens then is when you view them as customers is it forces you that they should be incentivized to use the tooling and processes and guidance. You should be viewed as experts versus standardizing and forcing teams to work with you as a mandate. This is sometimes the hardest part of our job. Because in the short term, and I'm, as someone who's also a parent, it would be so much easier if people just listened to you, right? But the fact is, you lose out. It's hard in the short term, but in the long term, when you are taking that mindset, it forces you to constantly seek feedback. You're always using data to drive your decision making. Twice a year, we have a very lengthy feedback process where we have a quick survey that's very lightweight, and volunteers of people who fill out that survey, everyone in our team volunteers and can interview other engineers. How many engineers here interview other engineers on a regular basis who use their tools? Right, one, thank you. Okay, I see a few. And this is something I encourage folks to do. Understand, get that feedback. And we use these principles when we were looking at the migration to the cloud, which we completed in 2018. We built out common CI/CD tooling, particularly we started with GCP. So we leveraged Drone, which a lot of teams were happy to have faster deployments. We also started treating secrets like secrets by using Vault. We built other tooling for teams to be able to manage their costs through a budget bot that would show your budget in Slack. And we also created a lot of guidance, particularly a GCP guide about how teams should be thinking of their application, as well as introducing other concepts with SRE. And we also participated and led some engagements where we directly worked with teams to either help them with their migration or work with them on figuring out how to roll out monitoring in a solution that would work for other teams. And even in some cases, it was very light touch, where we might just introduce the concept of production readiness reviews for teams and went through that checklist to make sure that they were ready to flip the switch and go from the data center to the cloud. And we also held an office hours where we can get all these teams together and listen and help them with their blockers. And it was great. It was a success. We are now cloud native. We migrated 300 applications, and we shut down 140 applications and rolled out common tools and processes. And everything is great. Isn't it? This is where, we just run our victory lap. We did it, check plus, everything is perfect. That's not the truth. Everything's not awesome. It's really at this point the hard work begins. I'm one of the only few non-engineers in an engineering team. And I have to usually explain to people that are non-technical, like what is it and what our challenges are. And I often describe it, it's kind of like when you move out of your parents' house in your 20s. You're an adult, you're fully capable of living on your own. But you probably can imagine, or at least in my case, when you first moved out, there were some challenges. I know I ordered way too much takeaway and had to deal with doing things like laundry and regular clothes and waking up for work every day. But the fact is, it wasn't the bad decision to do. It wasn't that I should move back home with my parents. It was just that I needed to learn to get better. It was just an evolution, and it was a process. But here were the challenges that we were seeing. So one is that our business workflows can span across multiple teams. So in this example, when we have our news hit the site, you'll have our newsroom, we'll use our CMS system to enter the article, and that information feeds into a publishing pipeline, which our content APIs pick up and then feed into our mobile and web platforms to serve on our application. These services also have their own separate cloud clusters with their own services, and that works really well for them individually. But this whole workflow as it spans is really viewed as having, I'd say, two customers. You have our newsroom and you have our readers that both depend on that process and workflow working together. When there's an issue or an incident, these teams that sit in different organizations and have different infrastructure have to work together. A lot of teams, and even though we finished the data center migration, a lot of teams were still reliant on systems to hold the page for them, and that really wasn't feasible. They no longer had that same technology set up, so teams and processes really had to adjust to particularly processes like incident management, where they needed to know how to hold the pager, the importance of having a run book, and what to do. So that was a problem that we were looking to solve. And not every team had the same SRE level. Again, we are a technology team that has been around for a while. And having to now have resources on your team to handle things that they are not used to is something that is really, we need to be mindful of. And so that was something that was an adjustment of not every team is able to do everything. The other consequence is we also were very much used to having a simple overview of how everything worked. But because each team in the migration, as a consequence, we only would see pieces of it. We did not have a clear overall comprehensive view of all the architecture that existed. So we're seeing all these kind of unfold in mid-2018. And we're working on these problems and we're making progress, but this trouble appears. And what is this trouble? I'm not sure if folks in the audience are aware, but this was a piece of content that was really spiked in terms of became very viral very quickly. We had an anonymous op-ed of someone in the Trump administration that it just very much became viral given the content matter. And what that revealed to us as actually, we had outages internally. And when we were we were really surprised. I think this is an example, though, of where you can kind of get lucky with an incident. Because what that did is it quickly realized that when we were looking at, wow, since 2016, We have 2 times digital subscriptions. We were also looking at a political climate about midterms. I'm gonna just do a quick explainer of what midterms are, because I realize this is an international audience. So a lot of folks are very familiar with the 4-year presidential election, but our elections for our legislative branch happen every 2 years. And that election that happens not in a presidential election year is called a midterm. It's the middle of the president's term. This year was it's usually seen as a referendum on the president. It's usually a pretty low turnout because voting is not required in the US. But this was something that, given a lot of the climate, there was a lot of attention that the majority of the House, one of the wings of the legislature, would go from Republican to Democrat. And there was also some questions of, would there also be an opportunity to gain more in the Senate? We were expecting a lot of folks to be showing up like none other before. Also, normally, when we look at high traffic events, when we were on the data center, when we would have planned events, our paywall would not be able to handle the surge of traffic. So we would always have it as just open access. And the fact is, I went open before about New York Times, and I talked about our journalism, because it's really important to be honest about this. And it's something I'm really proud of working at the Times. But if you want to support journalism, it means you have to support journalism. And we wanted to, and I think this is a part where SRE could also be helping to drive a business mission versus always just, how can we add value to our mission? And for this, what we were able to do for the first time is to be able to look at leveraging a high traffic event as a way to gain registered users who might eventually become interested in becoming subscribers. So when we look, we're dealing with all these post-migration growing pains, #adulting, subscriber growth, the political climate, and now we have new services that never had to handle this type of traffic spike. We had only 8 weeks to prepare over 20 teams. And that 8 weeks was actually really more like 6 weeks because we knew we would have to be having some kind of code freeze and wrapping things up sooner. So it was a lot of work. We quickly mobilized what we called the Midterm Elections Project team. We were very much inspired by Google's SRE Shared Fate exercise, and we had done similar engagements. If you're not familiar with the SRE, it's the Customer Relation Engineering team, and it's basically their external SRE. And there was a talk that they did with Home Depot, where they partnered with Home Depot on a large launch, where they basically were there of saying, no, we know you own the project, but we're gonna partner with you and help you figure out what work needs to be done, and we will be side by side with you in the room. Any outage that you face is an outage that we face. It's a shared fate. And that's how we viewed ourselves. It was very important for us that we were not considered the project owners and project leaders of elections readiness. We wanted the teams of those who own that experience to be the owners. So what we did, though, is we partnered with them. We shared with them. We were part of that group. And that way, all those product engineering teams were able to get the guidance that they needed. Our principles behind how we worked is we needed to mobilize teams really quickly to find any kinds of weaknesses that we had. It was also really important, as we said, in our DNA, we want to empower developers to take this on. So it was very important that when we worked, it was about how we are trusting other people and treating them as the expert of their system. And because, again, we're seeing that all these workflows span across multiple teams, and what we're seeing more and more is that just teams have to work together more and more. Wherever possible in the project, we wanted to drive collaboration. So how did we do this?
So there were really three things that we knew we needed to do really quickly. I'm going to talk about each of these in more detail in the following slides, but a quick overview. What we decided to do was start with architecture reviews. As Vinessa mentioned, we went from a model where we had a very centralized view of the world to one where it was now very decentralized. I'd say we may have even overcorrected a bit. And so what we wanted to do was really work with teams, since they were really the experts in their system, to understand how all this fit together. How had they re-architected things? What were their dependencies, and so on. We also wanted to focus on making sure that we shored up our incident management practices. In the older data center model, developers and engineers could really rely on our central ops team to make sure that incidents were managed properly and unfolded well. And what we saw was, teams both inherited the pager and the incident management practices for these apps. And so it became a little less consistent than it used to be. So we wanted to try to fix that. And finally, since we're SREs, we actually wanted to measure the results of those first two efforts. And we were going to do that through a series of stress tests and learning reviews, which are what we call blameless postmortems. So for architecture reviews, our approach was basically to start with this template. We sent this out to all the teams that were going to be managing systems that were in the path of elections traffic. And we were asking some basic questions like, give us an overview of your application, any links or diagrams that you might have right now available, kind of send those along to us. Where does the code live? In GitHub, even, in some cases. And then any documentation that they might have, RFCs they might have done around the application, documentation, monitoring, and so on. This was interesting in a few ways. I think, first of all, it gave us a way to really compile all this information into one central place that's searchable and referenceable. But also it was an early indicator of some of the maturity levels of these systems. Sometimes, a team that had lots of documentation already out there was a pretty good indicator that they had spent a lot of time already. Maybe the system had been in production for a while. And in other cases, maybe it was a pretty sparse thing that we got back. And it was probably an indicator either that they weren't getting the time necessary to prioritize for this effort, or perhaps the system was really new and we didn't really have a lot of this documentation yet. And then the second part of the template really was some open-ended questions for the engineers. So things like, what part of your application is most likely to fail? How do you determine if your application's healthy? What systems does your application rely on? And if one of those systems that your application depends on fails, how does your application respond? I love this campaign, the Hug Ops campaign, so I wanted to put this image here because I think this really sort of embodies how we wanted to approach these architecture reviews with teams. We sent this template out, we scheduled follow-up meetings, and the last thing we wanted was to sort of show up and be auditors or cops or something. So, we really wanted to be seen as partners in this preparation effort. We knew that these teams knew their systems really, really well. They were going to teach us a whole bunch of stuff about them. But also, we knew that we could come in with some SRE expertise and lend a hand with maybe improving reliability of some of these systems. As an engineer, I think we all probably have the situation where you wake up in the middle of the night and you think of something about your system maybe that you forgot about, or there's something that makes you worried. And we suspect that there's these situations where there's issues that are lurking really just behind the scenes that engineers know about, that they would probably be quite willing to tell us about, if we could sit down and talk with them. And maybe they just hadn't quite articulated them yet, and they could use some help with that. Or perhaps they weren't just getting the priority to fix these kinds of things. So, in these meetings, we did get a lot of, actually, both through the architecture review and through just, talking with engineers, a lot of really good ideas for quick wins on improving reliability. So our approach now was to create an org-wide epic, basically. We used Jira to track all of our work. So we made a board in Jira with tickets across all of our teams and our systems. And pretty much everything that was going to be oriented towards election readiness would get put on that board and tagged properly. And we also set up what we call a scrum of scrums, which was just, we meet twice weekly with the leads of all these teams, make sure that we talk through any blockers that they might be facing and really work to sort of get those out of the way, be it organizationally or maybe it was some cross-team technical issue that we could help them resolve. We also used the data that we got from the architecture reviews to map out kind of what the overall architecture of our site would be. This isn't actually it. This is a cool image of the internet that I found, but we're somewhere in there, which is good. But in the end, we did have sort of a graph to look at, lots of interconnected systems that gave us, quite a bit of insight into, kind of what failure modes might be, what kinds of things we should try to anticipate, and helped us prioritize work in some cases. And finally, based on each application's sort of tolerance of failure of dependencies, we could help teams start to work through degradation strategies. What happens when those dependencies do fail? How does that actually bubble up into the overall user experience? Which is something that, to this point, we actually hadn't really thought of holistically. So this was a chance to start doing that. So in parallel with all of that, because we had very little time, we also focused on doing incident management training. Things are going to go wrong. We should be ready for that. And we really wanted to develop a shared understanding of incident life cycles and roles. So at least if something happened, we were all speaking the same language. It was our sense that a better understanding of what our incident management process would be useful both in the case where an engineer landed as sort of the first responder on an incident. Maybe they weren't the ones that could fix it, but they would know sort of how to at least assume that role of an incident commander in an incident, help bring order to chaos, establish the right communication channels, bring in the right people, and so on. It would also give them better perspective if they were brought in as an SME or as a subject matter expert on an incident, to just understand what the incident commander is trying to do in that situation. Where do they fit as an engineer in trying to resolve this issue? And really focus on the bigger picture of an incident lifecycle. You've got sort of a cadence that you want to follow, a process that you want to follow as you're helping to resolve this thing in a structured way. So knowing as an engineer, whether you're an IC, to be able to kind of walk through these various stages to query other folks that are working the incident to sort of gain consensus on next steps, to communicate status and give people cover to resolve things. Or if you're an SME, knowing that that's what the incident commander is trying to do for you was really important to get across. And also, we just wanted to really emphasize sort of the non-engineering parts of this. I think as an engineer, it's your first instinct to land on a problem and want to try to fix it. And it's stressful to not know exactly what you need to know to fix an issue, or the system's bigger than what you understand. And I think, really being clear that that's okay, that it's your job at this point to, bring in the other people and to be part of a team of subject matter experts to resolve these complex issues. So some quick stats, we held 11 sessions over the month leading up to elections, trained almost 120 of our engineers. And overall, the response was actually very positive. And we weren't quite sure, how people would respond to this. But overall, people recommended it, or said they would recommend it to a colleague. And it continues to be actually one of our very popular courses. We continue to train people because incidents will always continue to happen. And so we just continue to refine these materials. And finally, we go to the validation stage where we do some stress testing. I want to be clear, our goal here really was to break things. We knew systems were behaving pretty well under typical daily sort of traffic. And what we wanted to start to see was, where do things break down? Where are the bottlenecks? We had a pretty good idea of what our upper estimate would be for elections traffic. We wanted to test at that and then beyond, really, to see if there were things that we could sort of clear out that might, resolve bottlenecks that could allow us to scale even further. So our approach really was, we wanted to test the whole system. We didn't want to test different components in isolation. We wanted to test in production. We wanted to test during the day when folks are in the office. I think the SRE community probably would be pretty well on board with a lot of this. I actually went looking for memes that would be relevant to testing and production. I found all the ones that you would expect, but I was also really happy to find our Shesh Patel, who runs our test automation team, did a talk earlier this year on actually how he did the testing efforts, or how the team did the testing efforts. And he also showed up in the Google image search when I looked for testing in production. So I'm going to point to that, and it's happy, and go check out his talk for a deep dive on that. So the concern, I think, from our business was that there's really little warning for the news. If we're in the middle of a stress test and something happens in the world that we have to report on, it's important for us to be able to spin that down quickly. And so, we got agreement with the newsroom and with other stakeholders in the business that, sure, we could do this, but if something happened, we had to be able to spin it down within 30 minutes. So, our preparation for the testing, because teams were actually, they are the experts in these systems, we really had to rely on them to provide us with information about, what are the endpoints that represent sort of a typical visit, what is the typical load, and then we worked with, as I mentioned, our test automation team, who's actually part of our SRE team. We're really lucky to have that as a function of us, to implement the tests and actually productionalize the stress testing, which at this scale is not something that we would necessarily expect dev teams to know how to do. And then, the test execution, we actually put everybody in one room, and our wider team in Google Hangouts, got everybody into Slack, and we asked all teams to sort of monitor their systems very closely, both so that we could turn this off if we needed to, but also so that we could have them monitor what were the metrics that were most important to their system throughout the test, and then post those results to Slack kind of as we were going. This was useful in two ways. First, we could actually pull all that information together and know kind of how our system as a whole responds to stress. And then also we would have a roadmap that if on elections night, we know where we are in the scale of testing. Is this territory we've been in before, or is this something new? And will we can know better, I guess, what to expect of the system under that condition. And we actually, as a result of the tests, also sort of scored teams and applications on a few dimensions. We wanted to see, is everything good? Are we ready for elections? Are there minor risks that we think that we can actually resolve before elections? Or do we think there's just significant risks that we really need to escalate now, either to get things better prioritized, or maybe we just figure out how we go to elections without that feature turned on, because we just don't really have any confidence that it can survive it.
And yes, our systems are Pokemon.
Yes, and our systems are all Pokemon. So
that's a joke.
We had test preparation and communication rating. So we wanted to see how well did teams actually prepare for the test. If there were incidents, how did they respond? How did they communicate in the process of that? How well did our incident management communication training work? And then also, how did the system itself respond? And then we coordinated learning reviews afterwards, just to see, or basically to review kind of what went well, what didn't go well, and to ticket out any action items for improvements. We gave teams some time to actually improve those things that we knew were issues, and then we did some retesting. And I think the thing I want to emphasize here is that we really tried to, again, just enforce collaboration. This wasn't an incident with one system. This was an incident with the wider site at this point. And it was important to get everybody in one room to understand the impacts of those incidents, and also to share ideas about things we could do to fix them and what the action items might be. So Vinessa's going to talk about the results.
Great. I think you got that one. Yeah. Good. Hi. So here we are on election night in our newsroom. And in terms of the results, this was record traffic for our midterms. And actually, one of our services actually saw 40 times its traffic. And this allowed significant registration growth. Again, I cannot go through specific traffic numbers, but this was an achievement for us. There, of course, were incidents, but it was a very fast incident response time. And because we also invested in failover, it was minimal user disruption. We also walked out with having much more of a demand for these types of operational maturity exercises. When we surveyed project responses, this is one of my favorite quotes. In my 7 years at the Times, I've never seen people come together and work towards a common goal in the way everyone came together for these elections. I love to enable this way of working as a norm for organization. It's really powerful to hear it. And so, looking forward, isn't everything awesome? No, nothing, not everything. Everything is still not awesome. There's still a lot of work to be doing, especially as we're going into elections 2020. But we learned a lot. The fact of the matter is, when you see these big events, some people might argue of, why do you need these big events to drive SRE? Shouldn't this just be, you're a news organization, we should just always be ready. And yes, that is the case. But the fact is, we're driving change that is not always just technical, but is also very cultural. And when especially you're in a larger organization that is used to a certain way of doing things, it's important to see these events as just opportunities to drive your overall strategic vision. We also learned so much as a team. By forming a cross-team within our delivery engineering team, we were able to learn about each other's systems and partner with each other and have other people really showcase other people's work to teams across technology. I think we're short on time, so I just want a reminder that we are hiring. Please check us out on Devs. I also highly encourage just checking out our Times Open blog to see what are the things that we're working on, not just in terms of our engineering spaces, but also just what we do in terms of culture and other aspects of this. And thank you. And if you don't want to raise a question now, feel free to reach out to Brett or I offline. I think we're fine. We can just ask maybe one, yeah. Wow, that was a hand.
What sort of carrots did you provide to engineers to get them to even prioritize incident management and then to actually show up for your incident management training?
You said carrots?
Carrots. Instead of sticks, I'm assuming. What carrots?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, well, really overall, I have to say, most people come to the Times, elections is a big deal for them. It's really exciting, everyone's really there. It's part of why people come. We have a lot of really talented engineers that are turning down opportunities at Facebook and Google because they care about the mission. And so they want to make sure they are really prepared for that event, so there was that motivation. But other things that we did is we made sure that at all levels of the organization, management, team management, at a high level, as well as team leads, were advocating this training. And then the other thing that we did is we made sure it was interesting. And it was really fun. And so as we showed that survey, is so after every session, the person who led it, David Porcher, he actually created this incident management training because he's a firefighter, and it's based off of these practices. I think a lot of folks, it's very similar to the PagerDuty model. But he made sure it was really fun and engaging, and after each session, he would ask for feedback and then tweak it based on that. So also word of mouth got to be really popular. And as I will say, Brett called out that a lot of it's still in demand. I always get direct Slack messages when we send out, oh, hey, we're doing an incident management class of, hey, Vinessa, can you squeeze in my team to do this training? We heard it's really cool. So good teachers as well.
So last question.
Hello. So you mentioned that in 6 weeks you had to integrate with a couple of product teams and help them with monitoring, with alerting, and generally handovering some new tools. How do you ensure that the handover is working and that the team will continue to use these new tools and the monitoring, etc.?
So the question is, how do we make sure that teams continue to use monitoring and tools?
Like the new changes that you did, like for the, in the 6 weeks that you said that you were preparing for like a spike in traffic. Mm-hmm. And so in my case, like the teams are like usually going back to their comfort zone and they reject any new changes, like in extra monitoring and extra alerting. So Yeah.
I could take a stab if you want to.
I mean, I think there's definitely cases probably where teams have reverted at this point. You know, I think we're going to continue to do these exercises, and we're also, we have a couple organization-wide efforts right now even to sort of improve and standardize monitoring. So this was just sort of like the first start to get us to a point where we were really ready for this event, and then, you know, the work continues.
I think this is also why the feedback is really important. And like I said before, in the short term, like I think you have to change your mindset of, oh, people have to use the tools. Like, no, they don't. If the tool is not good, they're going to look to another tool. And I think it is really on our responsibility to understand that if someone doesn't want to use the tool or it's not valuable, we need to understand why. And that's why I think it's really important too, time's over, that we do that. Thank you.